find it there. For once the guns stop blazing, you'll find it amazing how the world can drag on just as before.
If you're seeking freedom in a marble mansion,
If you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there. For even when it's sunny, you'll be counting money, keeping up that showcase your face lined with care.
and if you're seeking freedom on a throne of power,
If you're seeking freedom, you won't find it there. For though men all obey you, what if they betray you? Tents you'll be and waiting for foes everywhere.
but if you're seeking freedom, seek it on the mountains.
Why wander like a beggar, you've wealth everywhere. For never can you buy it, grasp and you deny it. Freedom can't be hoarded, it's free as the air. And if you're seeking freedom, seek it on the mountains. Got sunlight on your shoulders, the wind in your hair. For there's no one can hold you, boss about or mold you. Once your heart is free, you'll be king everywhere. For there's no one can hold you, boss about or mold you. Once your heart is free, you'll be king everywhere.
This reading is from Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Week 42, First Things First. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. That expression, first things first, is a piece of counsel often given to students of business techniques. It is the advice of practicality to those who aspire to worldly success. But according to the Hermetic doctrine, as above, so below, that which works best in one level of life is often the best guide to what will work best on every other level. If a person is true to his highest priorities, he will generally find that his other needs are fulfilled naturally as well. That is true certainly of the search for God. One of the greatest sayings of Jesus Christ was this simple sentence in the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 6. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Paramhansa Yogananda gave his elder brother Ananta a wonderful lesson in this truth. It was Ananta who had captured him and brought him back from his flight to the Himalayas, described by Yogananda in Autobiography of a Yogi. In Yogananda's book, we read how Ananta later challenged him in the city of Agra to pit his divine faith against such practical worldly considerations as the need for earning a living. Fearless before that challenge, the young aspirant agreed to go by train without any money to the nearby town of Brindaban, not to miss a single meal in Brindaban, and to find his way back to Agra without begging and without in any other way asking for help. In one of the most thrilling chapters in the book, Yogananda fulfilled all the conditions of the test. Yogananda continued the account. As the tale was unfolded, my brother turned sober, then solemn. The law of demand and supply reaches into subtler realms than I had supposed. Ananta spoke with a spiritual enthusiasm never before noticeable. I understand for the first time your indifference to the vaults and vulgar accumulations of the world. Late as it was, my brother insisted that he receive Diksha, or initiation, into Kriya Yoga. As the Bhagavad Gita puts it in the 9th chapter, those who worship lesser gods go to their gods, but those who worship me come to me. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Okay, I have to get close. Can you hear me? How is everybody today? Oh, it's such a joy to be here with all of you. We've missed you. We've been gone, I think it was maybe 4 weeks. Too long. So really nice to come back home. I'd like to begin with a reading from Whispers from Eternity. This is Yogananda's book of prayer demands and poems. And this is number 201. I take this sacred vow. Never will I lower my love's gaze below the eyebrow horizon of my constant thoughts of thee. Never will I turn my uplifted inner sight away from thee. Never will I let my mind dwell on anything that reminds me not of thee. I will disdain the nightmare of ignorant behavior. I will court all dreams of noble achievement, those of kindness, love, and understanding, for they are thy dreams. Though I dream many dreams, wakefully I will ever think of thee. In the sacred fire of constant remembrance, kept ever alight on my soul's altar, I will ever behold thy presence with the watchful eyes of devotional love. Thy grace has shown me that the dualities of health and sickness, life and death, joy and sorrow are but passing fantasies. I am finished with those eternally self-canceling delusions. I am persuaded at last that there is but one abiding reality, thy eternal, ever-conscious, ever-new, ever-thrilling, infinite bliss. Amen. So we have such a beautiful topic this morning, and reminder, first things first. The message was so beautifully shared in our reading and in the chant this morning, seek ye first the kingdom of God, for all these things shall be added unto us. And then it's so beautiful that the quality that we're given this week is on humor. So lest we get a little too serious in this job of seeking God first, I have a little story to share. So I couldn't give up this opportunity. The question was which story to share and how many, but I limited it to one. So a man dies and goes to heaven, and St. Peter meets him at the pearly gates. St. Peter says, here's how it works. You need 100 points to make it into heaven. You tell me all the good things you've done, and I give you a certain number of points for each item, depending on how good it was. When you reach 100 points, you get in. Okay, the man says, I attended church every Sunday. That's good, says St. Peter. That's worth 2 points. 2 points, he says. Well, I gave 10% of all my earnings to the church. Well, let's see, answers Peter. That's worth another 2 points. Did you do anything else? 2 points? Golly, how about this? I started a soup kitchen in my city and worked in a shelter for homeless veterans. Fantastic. That's certainly worth a point, he says. The man says. I was married to the same woman for 50 years and never cheated on her, even in my heart. Well, that's wonderful, says St. Peter. That's worth 3 points. Notice how that has the most points. 3 points, the man cries. At this rate, the only way I get into heaven is by the grace of God. Come on in. First things first. So when you read this beautiful chapter that is referred to in our reading this morning, the two penniless boys in Brindaban, it's that wonderful dialogue between the mind that doubts, right? The mind that is not convinced. And it's represented by Yogananda's little boyhood friend. And then the soul that is deeply rooted in God. And as we heard, they were given a test that they needed to travel by train from the city of Agra in India to the city of Brindaban. And with no outward assistance, they were to travel, be fed, go visit the sites, and then come back that day. And what's amazing about this story is that they could have just been given just what they needed. You know, they could have, when they arrived in Brindaban, maybe a fruit vendor saw that they looked hungry. Maybe they could have just been given a banana or a piece of fruit. And then maybe they looked forlorn, so they were then, welcomed into one of the shrines. But when we read that chapter, and many of us know the story, it ended up just so gloriously, right? When they ended up showing up in Brindaban, there was this lavish multi-course feast that was prepared for somebody else who didn't show. And so it was offered to them, and it was actually insisted, please take this glorious feast. We don't want it to go to waste, and we want you to have it. And then also that happens, and as we know in the story, the little boyhood friend of Yogananda doubts, okay, well, we ate now, but how are we going to get around? And this person had a dream that his guru, meaning Yogananda, was sitting under a tree. So he goes out looking for him, and he finds him, and then he grabs him, and he goes, okay, I'm going to take you around and show you the sights in my carriage. Right? And then even after this, the little boyhood friend, he doubts. And then again, they're showered with prasad, and they're just treated royally. You know, this experiment was not just barely successful. It was like overly successful, you could say. And then they made their way home. Well, reading this story reminded me of a story that happened to us while on pilgrimage. We just returned back 5 days ago from a trip over to Spain and Italy that we took with 20 other pilgrims. It was just a beautiful trip. In the beginning of the trip, we went to Spain. We flew into Madrid, and we went up to Segovia because we wanted to visit the sacred sites of St. John of the Cross. And then we did a day trip over to Avila, and we chanted, which is the home of St. Teresa, the beautiful chant, "Let nothing disturb you." And we were there 4 nights, and then the plan was to fly from Madrid to Pisa, Italy, and then go see the sacred sites in Italy. Well, the day before we're about to leave, one of our tour guides in Italy, Daiva and I, came from here, and then we had 3 tour guides in Italy who joined us from Ananda Assisi in Europa. So one of the tour guides said to us, I know we're supposed to fly tomorrow from Madrid to Pisa, but we're not really sure if it's going to happen because of 2 things. One, there's this very severe forest fire happening. Italy has been going through a drought also, and the airport in Pisa is completely shut down. Apparently the forest fire is right next to it. So we don't know if it's going to be open tomorrow when we fly in the morning. And 2, the airline that we were flying was I think it's more of a local European airline. Many of the pilots have gone on strike, and we don't know. And I, representing the little boyhood friend of Yogananda, started to doubt, and I immediately go into travel agent mode, and maybe we should start looking for a different city to fly into, a different airline. We should get on this. We're flying in less than 24 hours. But our friend and co-travel guide from Europe very wisely said, you know what? We have a schedule today. First things first, let's go see the sacred sites of St. John of the Cross. Let's look at this when we get back, and we'll see if the airport is still closed. We'll check into the strike, and they were just very clear. I said, okay, of course. We're on pilgrimage first. Let go of those details, trust in God. So we went out, we had a beautiful day. Come back at the end of the day, airport is still closed. No notice that it could possibly be open. We heard that there were some flights that were being flown, but we didn't know if it was going to be ours. And we were scheduled to leave early. We had to leave our hotel early in Spain, get to the Madrid airport early. And my friend very clearly said, let's just go and let's see what Divine Mother has in store for us. Let's just do it, because I think she maybe sensed my nervousness around it. In the reading it said in the end, do we worship those lesser gods? What are those lesser gods? It could be the things of the world, but it's worry, doubt, concern. And I realized at that moment she was so strong in her conviction. And I know the topic last week was victory demands the courage of conviction. And there was a beautiful service last week given by Dambara. And that's what the masters come and remind us. Seek God first. Not when you feel like it's seek God first. The title of our reading was First Things First. Not like, okay, maybe first things first. Are you going to follow God first? Then you have to do it with that courage of conviction. That's what our friend had. Said, let's just go and see what Divine Mother has in store for us. We leave early. As we're driving down to the Madrid airport, we find out, oh, in fact, the Pisa airport is now open. The fire's all taken care of. We're about to approach the airport. We find out many flights are not flying, but ours is. Well, you go, okay, that was just a really good reminder. But, even if that had not happened, again, trusting what Divine Mother has in front of us, has in store for us. So there we are checking in, and it's a smaller airline, and there's 25 of us, all having to check in a luggage, and Daiva and I were at the end of the line. I was like, oh, this is going to take a long time. But sure enough, there were only 2 people checking us in. Before you knew it, it seemed like it was only 10 minutes, and we were at the counter. And I could tell this young woman checking us all in, she was fantastic. She was quick. She was just would be done with one person. She'd invite the next person in. Big smile on her face. And I said, wow, you're really great at this. Thank you. She goes, oh, I love my job. And I was like, wow, that was another, We have to love this, love seeking God, do it with our full being. Again, that full courage of conviction. The masters, the saints, they're wonderful examples of this. In the early days when Yogananda first came to America, he told Dr. Lewis he was so excited about the concept of world brotherhood colonies. Many of us know what that is, but Yogananda came wanting to bring this thought of living in spiritual community where we can live simply together, pool our resources, but also live high-minded, support our spiritual growth. Here is Yogananda, a master, telling Dr. Lewis, I got so excited about this thought one day in this moment that I forgot about God. And I realized in that moment, no, that can't do. And immediately he banished that, and he remembered God first. Seek God first. First things first. The masters always come to remind us to live in that presence. And we get that opportunity when we go on pilgrimage. We get to surrender a lot, traveling with 25 people. And many opportunities came up. You'll hear stories at our satsang. But really, we go on pilgrimage every day, right? When we sit for meditation, when we come here for temple, when we come to a class, every time we think of God, every time we offer a kind thought, we're on pilgrimage. We're deciding in that moment, we are seeking God first. And the masters remind us we can do this all the time. It's not easy. That's why we come to temple. That's why we sometimes go on pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is like turbocharging your spiritual growth a little bit, because you're focused as much as you can be. So you can see thoughts can still come up, but you get a period of time where you can focus on that. Same with our meditations. If we're disciplined, if we have that conviction, yes, now I'm going to sit here. I'm going to offer everything that I am in this moment. And then the masters remind us by doing this, we become more like them. We become them. We become that light. We become that joy, that love. I'll tell one other story about pilgrimage. We went to Assisi. And in the past, I'd always tuned more into St. Francis, but this time I tuned in a little bit more to St. Clare. She lived in Assisi, and back in 1212, she left her home in the middle of the night. It was Palm Sunday, and she left her home. She came from a very privileged household at that time. There were only 5 noble families living in Assisi. All the children were really important, you could say assets, especially the daughters. You know, they would marry them, make these unions. But in the middle of the night, she fled her family home to join the order that St. Francis had created. And they were so overjoyed to receive her. And also, she was the first woman to join the order. Well, her family got wind of this eventually, and they tried to persuade her to come back, and nothing was going to move St. Clare from her decision. It wasn't too long after that her younger sister, Claire was 18 at the time, her younger sister Agnes, who was only 15, also joined the order. And there was no turning back, you know. And then at that point, then they moved to a beautiful convent called San Damiano, which is just below the city of Assisi, and it just imbued with the presence of Clare. She lived there for the next 40 years of her life, and although she was a superior, she was a leader there, she never let others serve her. She served everybody else around her. And then in time, and also her austerities were so severe, she slept on the floor, she hardly ate, that St. Francis and the bishop of Assisi came and said, you have to stop sleeping on the floor. Here, sleep on this straw mat, and you can eat once a day. But she was so inspiring that, this is fun, her mother eventually ended up joining the order, another younger sister, and her aunt. So one of these most noble families in Assisi also became a really noble family of Saint Francis, of this order. But as she was living in San Damiano, many years later, the Pope came to visit her, and they were about to share some bread together, and he asked her, he said, would you please bless this bread that we're about to receive? And she humbly agreed to do so. And the Pope, knowing she was a woman of really deep spiritual energy and just sanctity, after she blessed the bread and they had sliced into it, the slices of bread under the crust were all in the form of crosses. And then it wasn't too long after that there was an army that was coming through the Spoleto Valley where they're located, and they were just taking over villages, putting them on fire. And they were approaching San Damiano, and St. Clare just stood outside of San Damiano with the host, just there really firmly. And they came up to her, and they didn't touch San Damiano, nor did they touch the town of Assisi, which was just above. But a final story at the end, she did spend time with St. Francis, and one day they were outside in the forest near the Persuncula. They were outside with another brother and sister, and it was so beautiful. And they were just enjoying the beauty of the land. And when you travel there to Assisi, especially, it's in Umbria, Italy, it's just so beautiful. And then their love and their singing and their appreciation of the beauty that God has given us, a light began to emanate from them. And then the people up in the hill of Assisi thought there was a forest fire. So they went rushing down to put out this forest fire. And they saw there was just the light of God that was emanating from these 4 individuals. And that's what the masters come and remind us by the practice, by the regular and deep practice of our meditation practices, by serving each other, by supporting each other. We become that light. We become that love. We are that joy. We're all those qualities of spirit. And so whenever we lose faith, whenever we forget, let nothing disturb you. Turn back to the lives of the saints. Turn back to each other. Turn back to your own meditation practice. Rekindle that courage, that conviction that we will seek God first above all things, and then just see what comes into your life, whether it was planned or not planned. See the blessings, see the grace. So thank you all. Many blessings to be back and sharing this path with all of you. So.
I do feel very blessed to be back. It's lovely to see everyone. They say that humor is, they say tragedy is what happens to you, humor is what happens to somebody else. Which is cute and worldly, except that we are all one. So that doesn't really hold water spiritually. Another thought is that humor is tragedy plus time. And that's really seems to bear a lot of fruit. The trick is, for devotees, for those who are seeking truth, is to abbreviate the amount of time it takes for you to get the joke. Because, as one saint said, a sad saint is a sad saint indeed. You know, joy is the surest sign of the presence of God. Gangamata, it was a beautiful talk. I really appreciate the different points you made. A friend of ours talks about keeping the main thing the main thing. He runs a spiritual center in Hawaii, or has for the last decade or so. And, you know, we have to learn as truth seekers to not impose our sense of what's right on God. Because we don't know what God has in mind. Gangamata's story about the flight was very fun. Divine Mother loves... I've come to notice, Swami Kriyananda noticed, many other devotees have noticed, Yogananda noticed, that Divine Mother has a peculiar sense of humor. And that even the Bible says, "Your ways are not my ways, saith the Lord." And if we tend to impose our sense of how things are supposed to be on the world and on God, we tend to be fairly disappointed fairly often. So, you know, what we're encouraged to do is we're encouraged to learn how to commune with God, how to become deeply still inside ourselves in the power of meditation. Bible says, "Be still and know that I am God." Be still and know. Listen. And then the saints say, from that point of listening, take the next step, and then the next step. Don't try and read the last chapter of the book or the last page of the book. Read the next page, read the next sentence, read the next phrase. Because we never know. You know, the flight story continued because we finally, you know, the flight's supposed to be going and the airport is open and everything's going. And we get all of us herded in through security. And we go to the board that's posted, and every other flight on the board shows a gate for taking off except our flight. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited. And the flights are moving up the roster as others take off, and ours still has no gate. So, you know, again, it's white-knuckled clinging. We never quite know. One saint said, "I never know. I no longer have the capacity to discern a system that is disintegrating and a system that is developing." Because the cycle of how things unfold often implies disintegration of a form before something else can be born. And the friend of ours I mentioned, who runs that center, he's always saying, you know, keep the main thing the main thing. It's one of their doctrines. They just went through a period of time where Divine Mother decided to ask, what do you believe is true? And how are you holding yourself in this world? And for a matter of about 4 months, Divine Mother poured lava all around their property and destroyed hundreds and thousands of homes and left theirs just sitting there, but increasingly isolated. And then, you know, is the work going to survive? Are the buildings going to survive? Is the property going to survive? All we've done is this for God's glory, for God's, you know, to serve God's vision of communities in this world dedicated to God. You know, we went on this pilgrimage, and we went from place to place to place where people have lived in relationship to God so deeply that just going there, you find yourself tremendously uplifted. And it's powerful. But we need contemporary places of pilgrimage. It can't always be historic. We need current saints. Look in the mirror. Not somebody else, you. We need people willing to have the courage to live in the presence of God and to do what God asks, regardless. Anyway, the story is 6 days before the end of Pele's outpourings and offerings to the island of Hawaii, it burned down their home. And then 6 days later it stopped. And they're standing there, and it's, our faith is tested in the cold light of day. Our faith is tested not when things are going easy, but when life looks different than we think it's supposed to look. And, these are longtime friends of ours. But just watching the process they went through day by day as the question was kept in front of them for all these months, what do you believe? In the face of what's happening, what do you believe? And the level of joy and inner freedom that's continued to grow with them across this process is unbelievably moving. And they become themselves sites of pilgrimage. Just being around them is so tremendously uplifting. Because instead of resenting, instead of second guessing, they have just completely opened more and more to the light of God in the circumstances that are in front of them. We don't know what's supposed to happen. We don't know how it's supposed to work. Many of the saints that we visited, their lives were very, very hard. St. John of the Cross, he levitated. Here's a soul that's so connected to God that he can't hardly keep his feet on the ground. And he was trying to, the Carmelite order, just a real brief history, I just found this out. The Carmelite order comes from Mount Carmel. And it was a bunch of hermits who lived in deep austerity so that nothing would distract them from their communion with Spirit. And in Israel, it's easy to do because of the kind of weather they have and climate and everything. But they got driven out of there at one point, and so they migrated to Europe and ended up, and as the migration happened, the deep austerity started to fall away. And it became an order of still devotion, but of a lot more ease and comfort and distraction and many things. He and Teresa were born really to reestablish the austerity and the clarity that leaves for God's presence in the middle of life. And the order as it existed at that time became so upset at their efforts to reform it that they actually took and imprisoned him and beat him and basically starved him and kept him in a room with no light for 8 months until he finally was able to escape. The saints living for God is not easy. But if we don't do it, what's going to happen to each one of us? All that's going to happen is you get what you already got and you're going to die with it. That's as good as it's going to get. That's the problem with not reaching for God. When you reach for God, what happens is all of a sudden the things of our lives become incidental and the joy of God's presence becomes our reality. And that's what we die with. That's what we live with. St. Teresa of Avila, St. John of the Cross was their confessor. Part of her story, she was part of the Reform movement, and it was very hard, and she was there was a lot of struggle against what she was doing, but she was going around and she was working with these different convents and helping to support the sisters who were seeking that kind of a change. And she's toward the end of her life, and she's in bed with this pneumonia, and it's cold, and it's wintry out, and she feels God ask her to go to this convent that needs help. And without hesitating, she gets out of her basically deathbed. She gets out of her bed. Remember, there are no heated buses at this time. There are no roads. These are bullock carts, exposed. She gets wrapped up, put in this cart, across the muddy roads, and there's this river in the way of her going to where she feels God asking her to go. And she just says, go. And she just has them drive straight into this river. And in the midst of the river, the cart gets overturned. And she finds herself in the freezing, ice-strewn water, drowning. And the darkness is claiming her. This is the song. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you. All things will change, but God changes not. All things will pass, but God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. She's disappearing into the darkness. And she says, inside, she says, really, Lord? Really? And she finds herself warm and dry on the far bank. And she feels a presence next to her. And she looks over and there's Jesus. And he says to her, "Oh, Teresa, don't worry. This is how I treat all my friends." And she looks at him, and without missing a beat, she says, "Ah, my Lord, no wonder you have so few." But this is the end of every test, is God shows up and says, "Wasn't that fun? Wasn't that interesting? Wasn't that..." One of the pilgrims, she's not here today, but one of the pilgrims, she said, "I have never had to take antibiotics in my life." She's not a young woman. She said, "I've never had to take antibiotics in my life." And the week before, many people got tested before this pilgrimage went. And her test was she ended up with an ear infection that was so virulent and so powerful that she ended up on antibiotics. And not only that, she ended up finally on Cipro. It was just worse and worse and worse. And it looked like she wasn't going to be able to go. And we're talking through this week, and I finally said, if you get on the plane, get on the plane. If you're going to have an earache on pilgrimage as opposed to having an earache sitting at home, pouting in your bed. For at least do that. Well, she managed to get on the plane. She managed to find her way. The earache cleared up as she got on the pilgrimage, and she's walking. She's using walking sticks, and her foot's now bothering her. And she walks all through Spain and all through Italy, and we were putting on some pretty good mileage every day, and she's got her sticks, and she's just going for it. She gets back, and she goes, finally, because the foot isn't getting better, she finds out she's got a broken foot. She walked through Italy, and she walked through Spain. She said, "Thank God for my earache, because if it hadn't been for the earache, I would have been focused on the foot, and I would have gotten it x-rayed, and they would have told me not to go." Yeah. What she has is a broken foot, but what she has is a pilgrimage of self-offering. What she has is this enormous life-changing experience, because she didn't focus on these details. She focused on her love for God and her willingness and her yearning to have a transformative experience. And that's the call. That's the call of pilgrimage, but it's not just the call of pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is a reminder that every single moment, God is calling us. Right here, right now, we're as close to God as we will ever be. And all the exercises of yoga, all the exercises of devotion are to clear away the attitudes of our hearts and minds that clutter our consciousness and keep us from experiencing God's presence. We went to Florence at the end of the trip. There's one saint in Florence that's really, and it's a stunning place, but there's one saint of communion there. Swami even said, this one saint makes Florence worth going to. And his name is Fra Angelico. There are some things that are beautiful to see that he left in the convent in San Marco, where he was, frescoes that are absolutely divine. But he was a mystic. He communed with God. And he was writing a letter to a woman. we're going to end with this. Pardon me. I don't need that. Thank you. This one works, sorry. He's writing to a woman who he's counseling. And he's been working with her as a dear friend for a long time. And this is a Christmas letter to her. Let me see if I can get through it without choking up. "I salute you. There's nothing I can give which you have not. But there is much, very much, that while I cannot give it, you can take. No heaven can come to us unless our hearts find rest in it today. Take heaven. No peace lies in the future, which is not hidden in this present little instant. Take peace. The gloom of the world is but a shadow. Behind it, yet within our reach, is joy. There is radiance and glory in the darkness, could we but see. And to see we have only to look. I beseech you to look. Life is so generous a giver, but we, judging its gifts by their covering, cast them away as ugly or heavy or hard. Remove the covering and you will find beneath it a living splendor, woven of love by wisdom, with power. Welcome it, grasp it, and you touch the angel's hand that brings it to you. Everything that we call a trial, a sorrow, or a duty, believe me, that angel's hand is there. The gift is there. And the wonder of an overshadowing presence. Your joys too, be not content with them as joys. They too conceal diviner gifts. Life is so full of meaning and purpose, so full of beauty beneath its covering, that you will find earth but cloaks your heaven. Courage then to claim it, that is all. But courage you have, and the knowledge that we are pilgrims together, wending through unknown country home.